of the building. You saw 2 people at first plummet, and then a third one, and then the entire top of the building just blew up, and splinters of debris are falling on the street. Where I'm right now, there's a thick plume of smoke, and you can see crowds of people, including emergency service workers and police officers, running from the scene, screaming. And there's a school nearby where there were kids in the schoolyard. That has been emptied out, and they're running up the street now, too. The whole sort of the neighborhood, I'd say several blocks up, is covered by this almost powdery smoke. Little tiny pieces of building you can see just floating in the wind around it. It's almost as if like a huge cloud had kind of enveloped that part of lower Manhattan.
It is just one of those awful moments that you need to look at for a minute or two to absorb exactly what has happened. 2 of the most recognizable buildings in the city of New York have been attacked, and both of them appear to have collapsed, at least in part. The second of the 2 collapses taking place just a moment or so ago, perhaps 2 or 3 minutes ago. There are also apparently coordinated attacks that have taken place in Washington on the Pentagon. The State Department has been evacuated. Just a few moments ago, as we said, and perhaps 20 minutes after the first tower collapsed, we turned around and saw what looked like sparks falling, and then the top part of tower number 1 collapsing. These are shots from the ground of that scene. There have been frantic efforts to get people out of the tower. Now this is tape, and you can see now whether that was an explosion or exactly what happened that caused that second tower to collapse. We cannot tell you. CNN's Kelly Wallace is on the phone with us. Kelly, where are you? What can you tell us?
Aaron, I'm just about 4 blocks north of the location of where the World Trade Center was standing. I was actually en route to the command center, people really staring in disbelief. And then as you saw, of course, the pictures watching that tower come down, people just couldn't believe their eyes.
Okay. You're watching live coverage of the reported terrorist attacks on U.S. cities, New York City and Washington, D.C. on Texas Cable News. We are now joined by Dave Cassidy of our Belo, Washington Bureau. Dave, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
Dave, we heard reports, or we actually read reports from Associated Press in terms of Washington, D.C., that there was an explosion at the Pentagon and possibly that was caused by another plane crashing into the Pentagon. Can you confirm that?
I can only tell you what the FAA is saying. It is saying of some kind of aircraft crashed into the Pentagon. The pictures that you may be seeing, if you've been watching, there is smoke coming from the Pentagon building. There are conflicting reports as to whether this craft, whatever it was, hit the ground outside the Pentagon and then exploded, or whether it actually hit the building itself. However, there has been smoke billowing from the Pentagon now for, I'm guessing around 45 minutes. That is the only building in Washington so far that has actually been hit by something.
All right, because I did want to get to that. CNN had reported just a short time ago, possibly 20 minutes ago, that there was possibly another explosion in the Capitol, but you're saying that that did not happen.
I can almost for sure tell you that right now that was an unconfirmed and incorrect report about the Capitol. However, we are hearing that the State Department was evacuated possibly because of some device at the State Department. There are unconfirmed, and we have to stress that, reports that some sort of small device went off at the State Department, but that is not confirmed at this point. Most of the government buildings in Washington are being evacuated as a precaution. The only confirmed attack, because you can see the smoke billowing from the building, is the Pentagon.
We are also hearing, in fact, from Associated Press that there was a credible threat against the White House, and of course the White House being evacuated. Dave, what do you know about that?
That's the Secret Service says that the building itself was, as you just said, a credible threat to be some sort of target, as was apparently the U.S. Capitol building, as was the State Department. So most of the familiar government buildings, the Treasury building next door to the White House, the ones that aren't being officially ordered to evacuate are probably being unofficially ordered. The streets outside our building here are full of cars that aren't moving, people who are on foot. It would not be an overstatement to say, I think, that most people, except news people in D.C., are trying to get out of here.
Obviously, a frantic scene there, as we're seeing in New York City as well. Can you tell us anything about injuries from the explosion at the Pentagon?
There are no confirmed reports of injuries at the Pentagon. It seems to me it would be very lucky, given all the smoke and the situation at the Pentagon, if no one has been injured. That would be a lucky thing, but we have no confirmed reports of this. Communications in this town, not as bad as New York, luckily, so far, but they're almost at a standstill. People are trying to call families to say they're coming home. It's just very hard to get through.
Sure, absolutely. Of course, we are awaiting President Bush's arrival in Washington, D.C. He was in Sarasota, Florida this morning.
Well, you raised a good question. I don't know where he's going. I mean, if they believe that Washington, D.C. is under attack, not to the degree, thankfully, that New York is, I don't know that we know exactly where President Bush is going. Yeah, I assume he'll be taken to a very safe location, but I don't think that would be, at this point, the White House.
Associated Press had reported earlier that he was, in fact, en route to Washington, D.C., but as you mentioned, we don't know now again if that's for sure. We're still waiting for confirmation on that. We did hear him speak a short time ago.
But I don't think it's alarmist to suggest that they're going to be very careful about where they take the President of the United States.
Absolutely. What else can you tell us from your vantage point in Washington, D.C.?
What I can tell you is that it is very confused, but luckily nothing on the scale here that's happening in New York. We don't have buildings collapsing. There was a plane of some kind reported to have hit the Pentagon, and while we'll get more information about how bad that is, it is in itself not as horrid as what we've been seeing in New York.
And you know, Dave, we were hearing some reports also from CNN, or perhaps from a witness who was on CNN, that said that a plane was seen over the White House, which I believe is a no-fly zone, correct?
It is. My guess is that would be whatever plane came into the Pentagon. Those of you who visited Washington, D.C. know that the Pentagon is across the Potomac River in northern Virginia. But it's only maybe a mile from the White House. I mean, it's not physically that far away. If some kamikaze-style pilot were flying low enough to hit the Pentagon, and did, that plane would have crossed, or could have crossed, over areas near the White House, because it's not that far from the White House to the Pentagon.
Of course, during extreme times such as this, when details are pouring in, it is hard to sometimes sort through them, and at times there can be a lot of speculation. But Dave, we certainly appreciate your spending time with us today.
Real quick, I'm told by one of our people here from the Dallas Morning News that that is a confirmed car bomb at the State Department. We have no word about injury, but the Morning News is saying there was some sort of car bomb. Now that, again, pales in comparison to what's been happening in other places, but there's been some sort of explosion, however minor, at the State Department.
At the State Department, which has been evacuated, correct?
Along with virtually every government building here. Okay.
Dave, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Be careful.
Thank you. You too. We have Jim Hollifield on the line now.
Yes.
From Tower Center for Political Studies. Jim, what can you tell us about this situation here?
Well, I'm sorry to say that I can't tell you all that much, because like everyone else, I just heard about it this morning. But the thing I would stress, I hate to sound like a civil defense official, but clearly we all need to remain calm. It will take at least a matter of days probably to sort out exactly what has happened here. But I don't think there's any doubt that we're in the midst of the largest, most serious attack on the homeland of the United States since the Civil War. It would be since the Civil War that we've seen this kind of destruction in the United States itself.
Yes. Oh, hi, Dave. Okay, I can still hear you. You've got... All right. All right. All right. I've just received word from Dave Cassidy, who again came from our Belo, Washington Bureau. Dave says that part of the Pentagon has collapsed either from an explosion or a direct hit. You will recall that it was just probably a little more than an hour ago that there was some kind of an explosion at the Pentagon. Associated Press had reported witnesses seeing an airliner possibly fly into the Pentagon, something similar to what we did see even earlier at the World Trade Center towers in New York. Again, we're still waiting for confirmation on that. But again, Dave Cassidy from our Beulah, Washington Bureau just reports a minute ago that part of the Pentagon collapsed from an explosion or a direct hit. We're going to try and learn a little bit more about that. Obviously, just an incredibly horrific sequence of events in what President Bush has confirmed are terrorist attacks on American cities, New York City, and of course Washington, D.C. We are seeing that airports have been shut down nationwide. All airplanes that were in the air have been asked to land immediately. International flights to New York City and Washington, D.C. were asked to be rerouted to Canada. Jim, where do we go from here as we try to, obviously very frantic right now as we try and get together and figure out what the next step is?
Well, I am sure that there is an intensive meeting going on of the National Security Team of the President of the United States, and that they will be working out an appropriate response to this. And again, I stress that it may take some time to do that. We're not going to see instantaneous action. I think the action that must be taken now is exactly what the civil defense authorities in the United States are doing, which is to try to shut everything down, secure as much of the country, anything that might be a target, and try to get people to remain as calm as they possibly can. Well,
that's a good, a good point to bring up, because right now, as we are watching these incredible images, on the air, I think a lot of us are worried possibly about loved ones who may have been flying. Of course, we have a World Trade Center here in Dallas, possibly worried about that. What security measures can be taken, and what security measures will be taken for the president as he heads back, who knows, to Washington, D.C., maybe who knows where he's heading back to now at this point? Well, I'm sure he's going to be in a very, very secure place. I can't obviously tell you where that's going to be. But for a day, or at least for a morning, the United States has been at war. The problem, and we haven't experienced this on our homeland, as I said, for many, many years, well over 100 years. So this is going to be a new and a very frightening experience for many, many Americans. And the problem, of course, is this is not a conventional war. I mean, this is not a war where we can clearly see the people who are attacking us, where we can clearly see the state or the government that is behind this. It will be very hard to identify exactly who these people are. And of course, there may be many groups around the world that would immediately want to claim responsibility for this, hoping or wishing that they could take credit for it. So we're not going to be able to strike out blindly. I know that that's going to be an enormous temptation. Sure. But it's one that we will have to avoid. Absolutely, and what we were hearing earlier today, reading on Associated Press, was that the FBI did not receive any kind of a warning about these reported terrorist attacks, that there is no significance to the date today, September 11th. Yep. Of course, during extreme situations like this, as we are getting new details in literally every minute, it is tough because we don't want to speculate too much. Right. There was some speculation, though, and I've got to mention it, that Osama bin Laden's name was thrown out there, at least on CNN. Well, of course, his name would be one of the first ones to come up, because we have clearly been engaged in a subterranean clandestine war with him. Whether his operation is capable of mounting something this sophisticated and this coordinated, I really don't know. But clearly, whoever was behind this. This took enormous planning. Very sophisticated, very coordinated attack. Yes, so I mean, we're not dealing with amateurs. I think that's quite clear. And unfortunately, it shows up. It shows just how vulnerable the United States homeland is to attacks of this sort. Exactly. Thank God that we have not seen a small nuclear weapon exploded somewhere. Okay. And Jim, I'd like to mention on that note, here in Texas, we do have vehicles that have been posted out, DPS vehicles posted outside the Texas Capitol, of course, in Austin. Yes. It appears that Governor Rick Perry has canceled all of his travel plans. We are still, though, waiting for him to comment. Of course, security measures are being taken in Texas as well. Back east, we do know that troopers are heightening security because of the attacks there. We certainly thank you for your time today and your insights. Thank you, Jim Hollyfield. We have Dr. Fred Zuckner, a psychologist from the University of Dallas, on the line. Dr. Zuckner, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Alexa.